Hello and welcome back to another special episode of the Evolution of Medicine podcast. I'm your host, James Maskell. And for this episode, we are going back to one of our favorite episodes that we had in 2017, which was when I had my genes interpreted live by Dr. Yael Joffe. And, I didn't really know what the results were, and it was kind of exciting. And, I think for many people, the feedback that we got was, one, they had never seen anyone else have a genetic consultation or an epigenetic consultation. Second, they didn't realize that, an epigenetic consultation could be empowering. That's not really our understanding of genetics up until this point. And third, it was just, it was a moment for doctors too, to be able to see, how they could use genetics as part of their functional medicine practice. And so on that theme, I decided to ask one of my friends, Dr. Helen Messier, who is the Chief Medical Officer for Viome, to come and do the same thing. We're going to talk about the microbiome. We're going to talk about all kinds of other things that came with the test. So a warm welcome, Dr. Messier. Welcome, Doc.
Thank you, James. Great to be here.
It's great to be here with you, and really excited to to get into more of my details here. But let's first of all get into a little bit about Viome, and I know before you were working with you've worked with some of the most interesting and sort of potentially world-changing groups in the field of genomics. Why genomics for you, and why now Viome?
Yeah, that's a really good question, James. And I mean, my career has always been one of looking for the best tools available to help patients. And with the more complex chronic type of diseases that you see, the deeper you have to dig and the more you have to look to find what's really going on, identifying that underlying cause that's causing that person to have that disease and be ill. And so it's always been a search for bigger and better toolkit, if you think of it that way. And so I was involved in doing whole genome sequencing, in doing whole blood and urine metabolomics, and then as we all know from a functional medicine perspective, the microbiome and gut health is really central and is an underlying cause for most chronic disease. So we needed a better toolkit to look at that. And what we had available, and what is still available to most functional medicine doctors, is a 16S type of sequencing of the microbiome. So that's a very high level look. It's looking at one particular gene in order to identify all of the bacteria that are there, and it misses a lot. So it doesn't see things like eukaryotic species. It doesn't see things like viruses. I was always looking for something better to get a better view of what's going on in the gut and in the microbiome. And that's really what ultimately brought me to Viome, is the technology that is available here is one that we call meta-transcriptomic technology. It's where we sequence all of the RNA in the gut. So by looking at the RNA, we can identify every organism that's there, including DNA and RNA viruses, including all of the yeast and fungi and other parasites that might be there, and then looking at all bacteria down to strain level. So we can get a really high resolution look at what's going on or what's there in the microbiome. And then most importantly, we can see what's going on. So we can see what genes are actually being expressed. So you can think of it, in essence, you mentioned epigenetics. It's kind of like the epigenetics of the microbiome. What are they actually doing, and what functions are they performing? And we know it's ultimately not necessarily the bugs that are there, it's what they're doing that makes a difference in our health. And so that's the technology that we have available that we'll delve in your data and look at some of those functions that are happening in your gut.
Yeah, just to explain to everyone who may not have done this test, I've had a DNA test, right, where I swabbed myself. In this one, it was a bit different. I had to not only had to get the poop, right, to do the biome test, but I also had to drink the glucose drink and monitor my blood glucose levels over, a couple of hours, through that. So why the extra data points for this test?
Yeah, because we know that there's been a couple good studies published that show that the microbiome is critical in determining what we call our postprandial glucose response. So how high our blood glucose level goes after eating something. And we know that high blood glucose is associated with inflammation, and it's associated with many chronic diseases. So what we wanted to do is get a really in-depth view of how your bacteria in your gut are affecting your sugar metabolism and how you respond to different foods that you eat. We're actually currently doing a very big study of over 1,000 participants, and I'm wearing one now, but we're putting continuous glucose monitors on everybody. And we'll be able to have a predictive algorithm so that in the future we won't be making everybody do their own blood sugar. We'll be able to predict it just from their microbiome.
Yeah, that's super cool. Well, it's fun to be on sort of the cutting edge here and to, to have this test. So, why don't we just get into it? I'm going to share my screen so that everyone can see what you're seeing. And this was, I did the results, I got it all through, and then this is a PDF that was sent to me with the results. You can see there's an interesting piece here. Now, one of the things you said at the beginning that I was interested in was that you don't really see this as like a medical test in the same way as you may do like a blood test or otherwise. What's different about this test compared to other tests that people have done that are sort of medical? Because this is a consumer-based test, right?
It is a consumer-based test, and the idea is that we're not a lab. We're actually see ourselves as a wellness service. So when we look at this type of data, and as you'll see, it gets to be very intricate, very complex data. We don't expect people to interpret it themselves. That would be really, really difficult to do. So we do the interpretation, or actually it's our machine learning and artificial intelligence algorithms that do the interpretation for you, and then we give you the recommendations based on that interpretation. So as you can imagine, the gut microbiome it's never a simple one organism, one effect. It's a complex community that lives together, and they all interact with each other, and they all perform functions. So, the presence of one bacteria, its importance depends on the other bacteria that are around it. What it does also depends on the other bacteria and on you and on what you eat. So it's a very complex interaction that we use our artificial intelligence engines to start to understand. So we give you the output of all of that in the recommendations that are very personalized for you. And then that continually gets updated over time. So it's never a static thing. We're not a lab where you get a one-time test and a static report. As we find out new information, which we're continually doing because the number of papers that are published on the microbiome are just, exponentially increasing in the last number of years, we're continually keeping track of all the latest research that's done in the scientific community, plus the insights from our own data. And you get the benefit of those over the course of a year. So by signing up for one task, you get a whole year of that type of service.
Interesting. Cool. Well, let's jump into it. So I see you've got some sort of dashboards here of overall score, gut score. Where would you like? I'm driving this. So what would you like to look at first?
Well, there's a couple things. So what you're showing everybody is the PDF version. And again, remember that this was actually designed to be viewable on an app. And so all of this data is much more dynamic on the app. So if you look at it on the app, you'll be able to toggle between things. You'll be able to get, touch on certain things and have pop-ups that will explain things in a bit more detail. And we also have a chatbot engine called Coach Vi that's there to walk you through it, and that engine is being built out continually and getting more robust every day. So what you're looking at here is the static version, but that's good. It'll give you a good overall summary. So this is your wellness index. Okay, so it's a summary of all of your data, your microbiome data, your blood sugar data, and then everything that you answered in your questionnaires as well. So overall, you can see you're in the green there, James. That's
only just in the green.
In the green, but that's room for improvement, right?
Yeah.
So that we know that by following the recommendations, the goal is to really get you all the way over into the green. But I've seen a lot of these, and a lot of people are not in the green, so that's actually very good. And so that overall wellness score is made up of those scores that you can see up above that. The first one is your gut score. Yeah, and you can go down a little bit further too. And so you can see your gut score. And the gut score is really an overall assessment of the health of your microbiome. Okay, so in general, your microbiome is stable in the sense that you have some good things and you have some bad things going on, but in general, they're sort of balancing each other out, and we'll get into that in a little bit more detail. But I just had a question for you, James. Is at some point in your life, did you have some kind of big disruption in your microbiome? You may have been on antibiotics for a while.
Yeah, I mean, I generally am not. I've only been, I think, on antibiotics once or twice in my whole life. My mum was actually someone who sort of, with no medical credentials in 1980, was able to sort of predict the downside of overuse of antibiotics somehow. And so, like, I was the only kid in school who was not allowed to have antibiotics at the drop of a hat, which every other kid was. And so that was always, very interesting to me. I've had twice, once when I was like 22, where I had like a massive swelling here, and I took it. And then I think one more time when I just moved to America when I was about 26. But apart from that, I've never really taken it. But those two were like probably a significant course of antibiotics over maybe a week or two, 10 days probably.
Right. Yeah. And as you know, I'm sure everybody's familiar that when you take a course of antibiotics, it can really wipe out your whole microbiome, because it kills not only the bad guys that you're trying to get at, but also the good guys. And depending on what you do after you take the antibiotics will be very determinant in how you establish that new ecosystem. And so we can see that you have a number of sort of these potential nothing's either good or bad, but that community of organisms that you have can be potentially inflammatory. We'll get into that a little bit more, but that all goes into your gut score. We look at your overall diversity and things like that. Then if you keep going down, your body score, you're doing pretty good. A lot of that has to do with how you feel, whether you have any diseases or symptoms or things like that. And overall, I think you feel pretty healthy. The
questionnaire was my strength. I mean, I don't really have any diseases. I don't really have that many symptoms. Since I've been in the functional medicine space over 12 years, this would not have been the same when I started. When I came from England, and England has like a big drinking culture, and eats a lot of like crappy food. So it's definitely improved over time. But yeah, I mean, I'm at this moment, I don't really have any symptoms. I don't take any drugs. I'm part of the population that does that, so I'm not that. I see on the metabolic score, I'm in the red.
Yeah, the metabolic score is a little bit in the red. It's how you. It's based on that nutritional challenge that you took, and the sugar scores, and how your microbiome metabolizes the food that you eat. And so I have a little bit of work to do there, but we'll get into that too.
Yeah, so you'll be able. So these are the overviews, and then down below you'll be able to see what's driving those numbers, right? So I'll be able to know what's causing that red.
Exactly.
All right, cool. So diversity metric. Let's take a look at this. What is this telling me?
So diversity is one of the overall markers of gut health. And so what we do when we look at diversity, you think of it like a rainforest, right? The more biodiversity a rainforest has, the healthier it is, right? The more different types of species that are growing, the more resilient to stress. And it's the same with your microbiome. The more different types of species that you have, the more resilient it is. And so it's kind of an overall marker of health. And we also know that the more diverse your microbiome is, the healthier you tend to be. And so you can see you're the red dot there, and you can see that the bottom axis is richness. That's the number of different types of microbes that you have. And the diversity along the y-axis, that's the distribution of those species. So how many of those do you have, right? Do you have, say you have 100 different types of species, do you have one of each of those types, or do you have 99 of one type and then just a little bit of the other ones?
It looks like I'm pretty strong on the diversity, but
so your diversity is very good. Absolutely. You can see that healthy people tend to have more diverse microbiomes, and that makes sense, which what we just said. And you can see that you're above the 60th percentile for these, and so that's a really good sign. That's a very positive thing.
I would imagine, you know, when you say compared to healthy and compared to everyone, the average person who's taking Viome up until this point is probably pretty healthy, because, you know, that's the kind of, you know, health seekers. Like, I know Ben Greenfield's done it. You know, I'm sure he's one of the, you know, good dots over here. So, you know, the kind of people that have done it up until now is probably like a pretty healthy bunch.
Yeah, and actually you would be surprised. So in order to create these different cohorts to compare to, you know, I went through and chose all of so very strict criteria. So it had to be people that did not have any, you know, diagnosed diseases. They had good blood sugar curves. They had no medications. And one of the things that a normal weight, a healthy BMI, all of those things had to be met in order to be considered healthy. And one of the things that really a lot of people did not meet, that sort of excluded them from that healthy category, is recent antibiotics. So antibiotics in the last year, people couldn't be included in that healthy category. And
with the number that people are using in the medical system and the way sort of people default to it as an easy thing, that, you know, that doesn't really surprise me.
It's not surprising, but it's also a little bit scary how ubiquitous antibiotic use is. So this is what we say my RNA or your RNA. So this is RNA that comes from your cells. So these would be cells that are shed from the lining of the gut. And we can sequence that RNA and see how much of it is there. You can see that when you get a lot of shedding of your gut cells, or the lining of your gut, that's usually associated with some inflammation, some type of infection is when you see that really high. And you're right in the 54th percentile, so kind of right in the middle of our population. So not high, not low. And that's quite okay. It doesn't mean that you have a lot of inflammation, but there may be a little bit going on there.
Well, if I told you that I recently did I did actually another type of test, and I did have some inflammation. Actually, that'll be in one of these other podcasts. I just did like a basic lab, and my C-reactive protein, I think, was 3.8. So it was higher than I'd like it to be. So that's
really
probably
interesting that you say that, because one of the themes that we looked at, and it's not all in this particular report, there's a lot of data that goes into your recommendations that we're not actually showing you right now. We're trying to find a good way to show all these pathways to people, but it's a very complex data. So when we look at overall all of the expression of the genes in your microbiome, we can see a very what we call a pro-inflammatory picture. And so we see different pathways that we call things like chemotaxis. So, you know, when the bacteria communicate with each other and draw them together, and then they come together and they form biofilms. So you have a lot of biofilm production happening. You have some virulence factors being produced. You have a lot of flagella. So flagella are the little kind of tails that bacteria have to propel themselves around. And when they're in a stressful inflammatory environment, we see that higher. We also see this quorum sensing, and that goes along with the biofilm production. So quorum sensing is when sort of enough of these, I call them kind of gangs, right? When you get enough of these sort of bad bacteria and they gang up together, they signal each other, which is called quorum sensing. And then they form biofilms, which means they kind of form a community and they surround themselves with a mucus layer, and it protects them from other bacteria, and they can sort of start to be a little bit more harmful and cause inflammation on the lining of your gut. So we see a lot of those themes that are expressed in your bacteria. Now, it's not all bad. We'll get to the good stuff too, okay?
Yeah, no, it's good. I'm glad you mentioned quorum sensing, because I actually think that might be the most interesting concept I've heard. I've been researching a little bit because I'm quite geeking out recently on the blockchain, and blockchain is all about the coordination of decentralized actors. And so, you know, quorum sensing is actually, you know, something that I saw in the microbiome research on how do you get groups of how do you have groups of decentralized organisms to take action with no leader? And that's always been super fascinating to me. So I'm glad that I'm hearing about it happening in my body, because I'll be able to talk about it in the future. But I really think quorum sensing is a super fascinating concept, because ultimately, decentralized structures where groups of people can act together without leadership is something that I'm very interested in.
Yeah, and that's exactly like what the bacteria do. Precisely that is they get together and somehow communicate with each other. And when I say these pathways or enzymes that we see expressed in your microbiome, what we're doing is we're comparing sort of the expression, or what we look at it in transcripts per million. So how many transcripts from that particular gene are expressed in your microbiome, and we compare that to the average of our population of a number of thousands of people. So when I'm calling them out, what I'm saying is that they're overexpressed in you compared to the average person, so that everybody has a lot, most of these functions there, but when they're extra high in someone, that's when we start to pay attention to them. And so the quorum sensing in you and the biofilm formation functions and pathways in you are a lot higher. You also have this microsense C transport, and if you read some of the literature, that's actually a big theme right now in microbiome literature, and that is it's a protein that bacteria make to kind of kill other bacteria around them to sort of protect themselves. So it's like a virulence factor. And the other thing in terms of, okay, so I see that you have my gut open now. Go down, just scroll down a little bit, James, to get to the phylum level. We'll start there and we'll go backwards. Let's see. So what you'll see is, you see the phylum level here. Yeah. So the nice thing, as I mentioned before, is we can identify all these different taxonomic levels in your microbiome down to strain level, which is clearly the most important one. But even at a high level look, you can see that a lot of activity of your microbiome is from the phylum called Proteobacteria. Now, you're actually in the 98th percentile of Proteobacteria. So you have more Proteobacteria than 98% of the people that we've looked at so far. Proteobacteria are really associated with inflammation. And then when you look at some of those ones, and then you can scroll up now to the species. Yeah. That's the genus level, and then keep going to the species, and then you can look at the strain level. Yeah, you can go up to the strain level. Some of those, okay, so just keep that open, and we won't go through. Remember, as I said, they're not a one bacteria, one meaning thing, but I'll point out some of them as we go. So this desulfibrio desulfuricans, you can see the fourth one down. Yep. It's a bacteria. It's a very inflammatory bacteria. It's probably associated with this inflammatory picture that you have. And it's a sulfide producer. And so one of the pictures, or what we call themes, that we see in your bacteria is that, or in your microbiome, is that you have a lot of this hydrogen sulfide production, which can be inflammatory and damaging to your gut lining. And if you look at the other one here, this ethanolygenins, harbinenses, so that particular one is one that produces alcohol. So we know that it likes alcohol and it produces alcohol, and then this desulfibrio can consume the alcohol. So we see a lot of this ethanol sort of alcohol theme as well in bacteria that are producing it. So that may be contributing a little bit to your inflammation. Is that
like auto-brewery syndrome?
It's not necessarily that you have an auto-brewery syndrome, but that is something that can happen when there is a lot of ethanol produced. That's often from yeast. But we do see it in bacteria too. And what we're seeing in our data is that when we see a lot of those particular bacteria present, it is associated a bit with leaky gut and with this inflammatory picture. And then when we look at the functions or the pathways, we see a lot of that the ethanol theme and alcohol. So there's a lot of alcohol use and production happening in your microbiome.
So when we get down to the recommendations, we'll probably see some recommendations based on this, right?
That's correct. That's
okay.
correct. Exactly.
Anything else in this list that stands out?
Have you ever had a look at sort of your liver, how well your liver is functioning?
We haven't got to that. It wasn't in this test. I haven't done a liver function test in this initial one that I've done recently. But if this test, said that it would probably be useful for me to do it, I'd do it.
Yeah, I think it would be useful for you to do it, just to follow up on that. We're sort of seeing these hints happening here. The other thing that sort of the theme that we see are some of these, like this Prevotella melanogenica. There's a few others. Let's see if I can, your screen's a little small from what I see, but a number of what we call oral taxa. So these oral taxa are ones that come from our mouth, and they can cause periodontal disease in our mouth. And we know that they can cause a lot of inflammation, and they can form biofilms together when they get into our gut. And so one question I had, we see a number of these oral bacteria in a lot of people, is have you ever had any periodontal disease or any kind of dental issue?
Not so much. I've had pretty good, teeth. I have, more recently I've been, to have a filling, which I'd never had until I was like 35. But, I've always had pretty good, but again, who knows? Yeah.
And it doesn't necessarily mean that they came from your mouth. They're living in your gut right now. And so they are again, sort of that negative, some of the bad guys, I would say, that can lead to that inflammatory picture. So the Vianella parvula, the Prevotella oral taxon species that you see there, and the Prevotella melanogenica. You also have some Clostridium difficile. Let's see where I'm not sure if you scroll down to the species. There you go. You can see right there, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.
Yeah, I see that. So do I need to get a poop pill or what?
No, not at all. So it's not that you have a C. diff infection right now, but you have a C. diff organism that's there. So potentially, if you ever did have to take antibiotics, you would be susceptible for a C. diff infection, right? So normally it's the good guys that keep those bad guys in check and keep them from causing a problem. And it's when you start to wipe out those good guys with things like antibiotics that the bad guys can then start to grow and cause a problem. And that's really that's a really clear theme in you, is that you have some of these bad guys, but you also have a number of these good guys. Okay, so you must eat a lot of plants.
Yeah, like I eat about 95% of meals at home when I'm here. We cook at home a lot, and we have a CSA, and we get a massive box of veggies every month. So I would say a much higher proportion of vegetables than most any person I know.
That's fantastic. That's really clear when you look. You have a lot of this long chain fiber fermentation happening. That's a good thing. Your bacteria love to eat the fiber that are found in vegetables, and that's feeding all of these good bacteria, the Ruminococcus, the Eubacterium elegans, the Bacteroides helsogenes. Those are all really good guys, and those are what are really balancing out your microbiome and keeping those bad guys in check. So the fact that you're eating that many vegetables is really the best thing that you can be doing for your microbiome right now. And the other thing that the vegetables have are phytonutrients, right? So the colors in the vegetables, those phytonutrients create an environment in your gut that keeps those good guys happy. Okay, so that's even though you have a lot of those bad ones, that's what's keeping it balanced. And that's so important for you, because if you stop that, it could easily tip in the wrong direction.
So are there strategies that you can use outside of food, and we'll get to that later, but to to rebalance the bad guys without affecting the good guys? Is there like, I know it's not in this thing, but like, does the functional medicine MD in you say, hey, go and have, berberine or whatever?
There are things that you can do like that, exactly. That's sort of beyond the wellness scope that we're in now, but clearly if you worked with a functional medicine doctor, they could do that. In your case, you're balanced right now, so I would be
Cool.
cautious, but it's something, yes, that you could look into to sort of decrease that population of the negative guys. The one thing that we did look at, you've probably heard of butyrate. Butyrate is a really important short chain fatty acid that's made by a lot of the good guys. It keeps the lining of your gut healthy. It actually gets absorbed into your body, and it can even affect your own genetic expression. And the butyrate, the enzymes making butyrate are very elevated in you. So those good guys are working hard because you're feeding them, okay? And you're giving them what they need in order to make butyrate. So in someone that wasn't eating as many vegetables as you, I would probably suggest a specific prebiotic, right? One that feeds those good guys, though the prebiotic with the long chain fibers in them. So you have all of these pathways highly overexpressed, ones that digest cellulose, they digest pectin, and all of the long chain starches, and those are just fantastic, okay?
Right.
A lot of sugar conversion and all of those things. So one of the things that we did not see in your, we only show the ones that you're seeing. We didn't see a good one called Faecobacterium pragnantzii. That's helpful in preventing cardiovascular disease, gout, all of those types of things. Now, I'm going to bring up the gout issue because I did watch your
Tell me what's going on. This is great. It's like a hive mind of the best geneticists working on me. It's great. I like this. Tell me what to do.
So there's been a couple papers published this year actually talking about the microbiome association with gout. And they're even saying that you can use microbiome instead of uric acid levels to predict people that are susceptible to getting gout. And so there's sort of a pattern of bacteria and a lack, so some that are present and some that aren't present that are associated with gout. Now you do match that pattern. So you have high Bacteroidetes and high sort of other classes. It doesn't show up on this one, but on your app, you'll be able to see the class as well. And you can see that, I think it's on the app. I can see it on my back end here. You can see that those are all associated with gout, and then the lack of some of the good guys like the Faecobacterium pragnantzii, which are associated with gout. So it's not surprising. The other thing that we see in your pathways, let me just pull it up here. We see in your pathways much higher production of uric acid. So you have a 4-fold increase in guanine to xanthine conversion, which as you know, is a precursor of the uric acid, and then you have a 1.5-fold increase in xanthine to uric acid production happening in your microbiome. You also have a urease enzyme that's highly produced. So these are made by certain bacteria, and that can contribute to the reason, as you know, gout is high uric acid in the blood, and that can be contributed to by these microbes and those particular pathways.
Super interesting. Yeah, that's really, really fascinating. So yeah, you can go sort of further back in the food chain, basically.
Absolutely. And one of the things that we see is that, at least in this one paper, you may have heard of a probiotic called E. coli missile. Now, I don't think it's available in the States anymore. There was reasons that people don't, it's not available, but it is available in Europe still. And that is a bacteria that does not have the urease, and it can outcompete the bacteria that have that urease. So that's something that could be done. Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah, that sounds good. So let's just go through. Is there anything else you want to talk about here with the viruses, or should we get into some of the recommendations?
Yeah, the other thing I wanted to touch on is if you go back up to the viruses, this is another place where the Viome technology is really shines, because you can't see viruses any other way. And so you can see that you have a number of species of virus. You see the salmonella phage, and then you also see 1, 2, 3, 4 different plant viruses. We're finding viruses, or plant viruses actually, are very common in the microbiome, and plant viruses actually use the human as a vector to transmit themselves from plant to plant. So they cause diseases in plants. We eat the plants, they grow in our microbiome, and when we poop them out, they transmit themselves to other plants. And one of the things we're finding is that they can cause an immune reaction in humans. And so things like, there's been a study on this pepper mild mottle virus that shows that humans can make antibodies to that virus, and it's associated with gastrointestinal symptoms and with even cause skin rashes and fever in some people. Now, quick question, do you have any gastrointestinal symptoms at all, James?
Not really. I would say, you know, maybe some like bloating, but definitely not like, you know, no. I mean, yeah, very little like abnormal stool, or very little, you know, like no pain, I would say. You know, ultimately, yeah, probably bloating and inflammation, maybe.
Yeah. So the bloating is something, you have a number of kind of patterns that would suggest SIBO. So what, as you know, SIBO is small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, and there's some things that are hinting that that is an issue for you. So SIBO, as you know, can cause bloating after you eat, usually within an hour or so after you eat. And that might be something you can follow up and have a real SIBO test to determine that. The other thing is we see a lot of this bile acid production and a lot of bile tolerant species in your microbiome. And so that could be consistent with some SIBO in your upper intestine that's preventing bile reabsorption. So that bile is getting down into your colon and affecting those bacteria. And the other thing, you know, on the bile sort of theme is that you have a very high amount of beta-glucuronidase enzyme being produced, and beta-glucuronidase can kind of cause reabsorption of different toxins, of hormones, things that your body wants to get rid of in the stool. It can cleave off the glucuronide molecule and cause those things to be reabsorbed. So that's kind of another overarching theme that we see, is that kind of a need to detox. One of the things we're finding is that bacteria, or microbiome, are probably our first way of detoxing things that we take in, right? So we can see those detox pathways being expressed. And one of them that's expressed in you is something called methylnaphthalene. Your bacteria are working hard to get rid of that substance. And that can come from smoking. So are you exposed to cigarettes or smoke in your...
Yeah, a little bit, yeah.
Yeah, so your bacteria are working hard. We can see that there's some exposure to smoke, and so we can thank them because they're working at getting rid of it, but it's causing a little bit more stress in your gut as well. And so that's just something to be aware of. You know, just don't go into environments where there's a lot of smoke and get that secondhand smoke. That's something to think about. And the other thing is, do you take glutathione?
I have done in the past for a specific protocol, but not all the day, not every day.
So your bacteria are very actively using glutathione, and that's another way that your bacteria protect themselves and you basically from oxidative stress and from different toxins. And when we see a lot of glutathione being used, it's also suggestive that it's kind of a hostile environment. So it's a good and a bad thing, right? Your bacteria have to use glutathione to protect themselves, but the fact that they have to use glutathione is not a good thing. So it's kind of a yin and a yang.
Okay. So that's, yeah, good to know.
Yeah. And so we do see that as well. so those are sort of jumping around a little bit, but I want to fill it in with the pathways that we see that are going into your recommendations, but you don't see them in the results yet. We're having a new design coming out in the new year where we'll be showing a lot of these pathways to people. So if you keep going down, you can see some probiotics. So there's a couple bacteria that are showing up that you would find in probiotic species. And some of, if you just scroll up a little bit, I think you just passed it.
Okay, probiotics, yeah, there we go.
Yeah. And so these can, these are normal constituents of the gut, and these are also ones that you find in commercially available probiotics. You only have 2 of them. And so it's one way to see if any probiotics that you're taking actually colonize and are active in your gut. The other thing, we see these rare bacteria. Rare bacteria just mean that they're present in you, but they're not common in the rest of the population. And so you have a couple of those rare bacteria. In most cases, we don't really know what those rare bacteria mean because they're so rare. So we're learning about them and what they do. A lot of them come from the environment, and they've been sequenced in different animals and different places in the environment.
Got it.
As you go down, you can see the good guys. Akram Anthea, that's a really good guy. Also, so you're right about the middle. Yeah, stop right there. You're about the 64th percentile in Akram Anthea, and that's a good thing. Akram Anthea is associated with lower rates of diabetes, lower rates of obesity, and so it tends to be up in people who restrict calories. So do you ever do intermittent fasting or anything?
Yeah, I have. Yeah, I've done it. I've done it quite a bit. In fact, I think when I took this test, I was sort of in the middle of it. I've done, like I do a day here and there without it. I've done 2 days, just trying out different things.
Yeah. So that can help Akram Anthea become more active, and that's a good thing.
Cool.
The other thing that I want to finish up before we get into the recommendations is another thing that we noticed in your pathways is that your iron transporters were up, and we also see a lot of metabolism of things like norepinephrine or noradrenaline. So those are stress hormones, as you know. Norepinephrine, when you're under stress, it can get released into your gut, into the lumen of your gut, and your bacteria will start to metabolize it. But those stress conditions can cause iron to be released. So it can cause lactoferrin to release iron. And then that iron, as you know, pathogens can use iron to make them more pathogenic. And so there's some of that going on. So if you do take a multivitamin, probably best to take one without iron. And so being, you don't want to feed those potential bad guys any more things that they need than you might have to. Okay.
Super interesting. Yeah.
So that's an important one. You are making a bunch of B vitamins. You're making vitamin B12. You're making a lot of the selenoproteins, biotin, B6, B7. So your bacteria are making a lot of the good B vitamins. You have, like I mentioned before, that high butyrate production, and then you have all of those antioxidant pathways that are trying to keep things in check. Okay? Cool. We also see some glucosamine sort of metabolism going on, which could mean you may have taken glucosamine, or you could be getting that in your diet. And so I think, let's just make sure. So overall, I think, you're also making a lot of the tryptophan metabolites. So one of the things, essential amino acids, those are the amino acids that our bacteria, that our body can't make, that we have to get in either our food or our bacteria. We depend on our bacteria to make a lot of those essential amino acids and vitamins for us. And so you're making a lot of those. They're really active. That whole tryptophan pathway makes serotonin. It makes all kinds of both good and bad. And that pathway is very, very active in you. Okay. So
I've always been a good sleeper.
That's good. Yeah, that's good. And you probably have sort of regular, bowel movements as well, right? So because that can help with motility. We see that as well. Okay, so in your recommendations, let's see. So what you see are high-level look at kind of a serving size. So what you would benefit from in terms of protein. So 4 servings of protein, either animal or plant-based a day. You don't want to go too high in protein because you have that ammonia production and some of those potential bacteria that can use protein. So the fact that you're eating a lot of plants is keeping those in check. If you started, changing that ratio and increasing a lot of protein and less plants, then you could start getting into trouble. So you need your protein, but just not a crazy amount of it.
Okay.
So the dairy substitute, around 3 servings or so of that, and that can be from nut milk or dairy if you can tolerate dairy and don't have allergies to it. So we won't go through all of that, but you can see the nuts and seeds, vegetables, 11 servings of vegetables a day, and sounds like you're getting that. And think about a serving is about 1 cup raw or a half cup cooked. So it's not a lot, right? You get a bit on your plate. And then a high level, you can see some supplements that are suggested for you. So the Metagenics Ultraflora. Now Viome doesn't recommend any particular brand over another, but we do look and see which ones are high quality and which ones have what you would benefit from, the ingredients in them. Yep. So, we don't make any money on selling supplements. But the Metagenics Ultraflora Spectrum has the combination of probiotics that would benefit your microbiome. It has Saccharomyces boulardii as well, and that will help keep that C. diff in check if that's ever an issue. Now, one of the things you didn't see is any eukaryotic species. So you don't have any yeast or fungi or parasites that are active in your gut right now. They didn't show up in any of your sequencing.
That's good.
So, and then a digestive enzyme, you can see that some zinc carnosine, that probably for that leaky gut, these are all generated from the AI engine that are based on all of those results we went over. And then that beta-glucuronidase, sometimes calcium D-glucarate can help with that. And then the CelloPro can help keep those good bacteria, those good butyrate producer bacteria happy. All of these you're doing with the plants in your diet as well. So you're a balanced metabolizer. So that blood sugar that you took showed that you're actually your insulin, diabetes isn't a problem for you. You were very quick at metabolizing that sugar. And so you can kind of go down and if you scroll a little bit more, you can see the macronutrient recommendations that were shown above in that serving suggestion, and that you want to aim for kind of even amounts of protein, complex carbs, and fats. But as you go down a little further, you'll see what they look like on your plate. Because, fat and protein are much more calorie dense, your plate will actually look like mostly vegetables. And it sounds like that's what you're eating right now. And so as you keep going down, just scroll down. It talks a little bit about, now clearly if you know that you're allergic to something, you definitely want to avoid that, right? So we're not looking specifically for allergies. Some of the newer things that we're incorporating over the next year coming out will be looking at metabolites and looking at blood transcriptome and certain allergies. So right now this data doesn't take that into account. So what you're going to see is a list of enjoy foods. And these are all foods that, are good for you that you can go ahead and eat lots of. They'll be really benefiting your metabolism and your microbiome. So you can see them under the carbohydrates, the fats, and the proteins.
Yep.
And so, again, it looks a little bit different on the app, but that's okay. So you get all that list. And then you get the list of minimized. So these are foods, it's not that you can't eat them, but these are foods that you want to just limit. You don't want to be eating big amounts of them every day. And so that's here. Now, because your microbiome is, you're balanced at being at that postprandial glucose response, you're one of the lucky people that have a lot of foods that you can enjoy and less foods that you need to minimize. Okay, so.
Right, so this is a good list for me. Corn and potatoes, dates, prunes, raisins, beer and wine and beverages, sweeteners, cocoa, dark chocolate, honey, maple syrup, stevia, xylitol. So quite a lot of sweeteners there. To steer clear. Proteins, tilapia and tuna, legumes, peanuts, and dairy heavy cream.
Yeah. Exactly.
That's interesting. Yeah, it would be it's that time of year to be able to trying new things. I appreciate looking at this and seeing what would be good to try it and then do the test again.
A couple things. Just scroll back up. I wanted to point out just a couple things. Now, one of the bacteria that I forgot to point out is one called Gordonobacter. And Gordonobacter is one of those bacteria that can take ellagic acid and turn it into urolithin A. Now, urolithin A is anti-inflammatory, antioxidant. It's a great thing. And it's found in different berries. So strawberries, pomegranates. It's what makes pomegranates good for some people and not good for other people, if you have that bacteria that's capable of doing that conversion. And so because you have that bacteria, some of the things that you're going to see on your recommended foods are things like pomegranates and raspberries and strawberries, so that you take advantage of those particular bacteria that can do that conversion. Okay? And so you can see that there. And then just keep scrolling down, James. I think those are the minimize, and then there will be some avoid ones as well. Yeah, so those are most of the sweeteners, because you do have some of that sugar production that if you did eat a lot of sugar, that could be problematic for you over time.
I see most of those are sugars there. Margarine, I don't eat anyway. Milk is probably the only thing that I have. I don't drink milk. I have a little bit of milk in coffee, but I guess I could, definitely switch easily in California anyway to other kinds of milk. A little bit of white rice here and there, but not a lot. The rest of the stuff, I don't have a lot of sugar generally.
Which is really good, which is why, you're keeping things in check. Absolutely. And then I think that's the end of.
That's it.
Yeah. So that's kind of, we got a bit into some of the pathways that are and make up those recommendations. So the supplements and the foods, and like I said, the new design will be coming out this year as well.
That's great. Well, look, I really want to share my appreciation. I know this is not, this doesn't come standard with the Viome test, an hour of your time, and I really appreciate you making time for it. I think, a couple of things that I'm just really fascinated to see the progress is one, companies that are bringing, sort of functional medicine type insights directly to the consumer, I think is super interesting. And I think that designing around the needs of the consumer is definitely the future of medicine. And so we're really focused in on that too. And ultimately just, the personalization of these kind of we've seen personalization based on all kinds of factors over time, right? You've had the blood type diet and this diet and that diet, all, people, thinking this is how you personalize it. And it's just really interesting to see it based off, the microbiome and also based off things that are, that are not permanent. Like my blood type's not going to change, right? But what I've been eating will lead to changes in the microbiome and then, and so forth. So I'm interested not only to just have got the information, but I'm interested to see what happens when we do this again in the summer. And, hopefully we'll see some significant positive changes. That's the plan.
That's the plan, absolutely. And the idea is to start bringing all of these things together, right? Because the microbiome tells you what's happening now, as opposed to genetics, which is telling you what you have the potential for, right? And by combining them, you actually get an even bigger picture of what's happening. And so, at some point we can talk about your genetic interpretation and how that fits into some of the microbiome insights as well, because as we bring in the transcriptome, so the blood transcriptome, so what genes are being expressed in you, that's going to really tie the whole picture together. So it's exciting, and I agree. And we, as practitioners, I know a lot of practitioners watch. We will be offering a training course to help them understand a little bit more about what goes into this type of advanced technology.
Yeah, but I think, what's really exciting ultimately is that, if we're always waiting for doctors to be the interpreter of every test, the ability to be able to deliver personalized medicine is limited. And I think that, ultimately I'm very much in agreement that if we can empower people with their own information and help them to understand it, the doctor still has a role, right? The doctor still has a very powerful role to play in this, but it's just not the same role as always been played. And this is the big shift from, doctor-based medicine to patient-based medicine. And so I think that there's many things that all of us can learn, who we're all in the helping patient business here, about how to create things that are actionable and easy for people to understand, that can be coached. So look, I really appreciate the time, and I think it was very valuable. I'm glad we did it. And, it's interesting because I did that test, I'd say last summer. Thinking back, I think, I can see maybe where some of the alcohol things came from. I had a very sober October and December. And so, going into the new year, looking to continue that trend onwards in a healthy direction. And it's really helped to reinforce that. So I thank you.
Repeat the test, James. I'd be happy to go over again with you. But if you repeat it after that sober October and all of those good things, one of the nice things about this is it can be used to monitor how you're doing.
That's
and
great.
to really see early signs of problems so that you can address them before they become a problem.
Predictive, preventive medicine, right? That's it.
And
Awesome. Well, look, if you're interested in the test, go to goevomed.com/Viome. You can order a test for yourself or for your patients there. It was enjoyable to see this information. I hope that if you're watching at home, this has been valuable for at least to understand, what this kind of thing might look like. There are concierge doctors that may be using these kind of tests, but there may be more and more patients coming into your offices saying, hey, Doc, what do you think of this? What does it do? And maybe you can at least understand from there a little bit more about how this works, what's going on, what's it testing. So, that you can at least, know that much when people come in. But, Helen, thanks so much. And I'm really excited to see how the company continues. I have to say one of the reasons why I wanted to do this is that, one of the things I love about Naveen is just the energy that he brings to, creating the new system that makes the existing system obsolete. Like, that's a phrase, and it's been at the bottom of my email for 4 years. And just the energy that he comes with to be like, it's not like this could happen. It's like, yeah, this is going to happen. We're going to do this. And that's the energy that I've tried to sort of infuse the functional medicine community with. And so I'm really excited to see, people who aren't really in the functional medicine community starting to realize that, if we can go upstream, if we can do predictive preventive medicine, we can really, have a real chance at transforming medicine. So thank you for all your great work. I think I told you last time that you had the most important job, in medicine, bringing together genomics and functional medicine. I think you've still got it.
Awesome.
All right.
Having fun every day doing this. It's really what's going to make the difference.
Great. Well, this has been Dr. Helen Messier. She's the Chief Medical Officer of Viome. Go to goevomed.com/Viome to order one of your tests. We'll have all the details in the show notes below. Thanks so much for listening, and we'll see you next time.